I'm Jay Moran.
I'm Bridget Jaipal Valenza.
I'm Thomas O'Neill White.
I'm Angelique Preston.
We need to get together and let our voices be heard.
This is What's Next, a dedicated hour to have important conversations about the issues facing the marginalized and underrepresented communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario.
We're going to have some real healing. We've got to have space to tell some uncomfortable truth.
What's Next continues our mission to discuss race,
Equity,
And the common concerns of Buffalo's East Side and beyond.
In the suburban area, everywhere, we must work and teach our children.
And we're in Olean High School for this installment of What's Next. And with us, Dr. Genelle Morris, superintendent of Olean City School or Central School?
It is City School.
All right, very good. And, you know, it's an interesting part. Like, we like to talk. I mean, I think you obviously spent a lot of time in Buffalo. You knew a little bit about Olean, I'm sure, if only from, you know, news and things along those lines. But I think at the same time, there's a lot that people maybe in Buffalo don't know about Olean. Now that you've been here for a while, all over a year plus, what about Olean? What are the things that you have found out about being in Olean that, you know, maybe are a little bit surprising that other people from, let's say, Buffalo wouldn't necessarily understand?
Okay, well, there's a lot of things that you may not know if you're in the Buffalo area about Olean. So it's a very small city school district area, so we're a little bit above 3 miles in square distance, and that means a lot of our students are walkers. It's a very small community with a rural feel. I call us rural adjacent. Okay. We are a small city school, but a lot of our kids walk. It's very community based. It's very friendly. We're in this beautiful valley where, you know, we have a lot of community and connection here. That's just amazing to be a part of.
I'd like to explore that city-rural connection a little bit, but I want to just talk a little bit about your background, which is really a fascinating background in the sense that you actually, I think, started, as a biology teacher in the city of Buffalo School District?
I did. I started initially as a life science teacher.
Okay.
That was for middle school. That was really fun. We were very open to learning different elements of biology and physical science, and then I moved into biology at the high school level. I also taught AP biology, and just it was really a fun time. We're just helping students discover things about life science and biology and science in general. I just love that discipline.
Which buildings were you in?
I was at School 51.
Okay.
I don't believe that building and definitely not that school are open anymore. And then I went to Bennett High School, and I was at Bennett High School for the majority of my teaching career.
I see.
Yeah.
Okay. And what about what did you learn about education in the city of Buffalo district?
Oh, it was so fun.
Yeah?
I mean, it was really fun to just kind of capture that experience. I found that students were willing to learn, and it was something where we could be as creative as we wanted to be. So, for example, we had the opportunity to get transportation to go and do a field trip. And I said to my life science students, I said, you know what, we're going to Tift, and we're going to observe animals in their habitat. And I'll never forget having this group of 8th graders and 7th graders running across the little hills, and we're running after the deer because we're observing them in their habitat. And the kids were just so excited to do this and just kind of immerse themselves. As an AP biology teacher, what was cool about that was we were creative. We wanted to teach AP, but we were given a distance learning opportunity. So I was able to collaborate with students in Sherman and Franklinville, and we did a distance learning opportunity, and we would meet each other when it was time for laboratories. But it was so fun, you know, and we were so creative. Like, all right, I know you're in Sherman, I know you're in Franklinville, but we're going to get together virtually and do this laboratory think tank experiment, and they just were so into it. They were open. They were happy to do these types of explorations into the science, and it really was a joy to do that.
As somebody who really struggled with high school biology, I wish you were my teacher, Dr. Morris.
My
yes.
gosh.
So how did you said to me, I love the way you said it was fun.
It was fun.
How did you make it? I mean, obviously you had a key part in that. I mean, what different elements did you bring to the classroom that you think helped make it fun? But it sounds like it was fun for you, and obviously it was fun for your students. I just tried to look at the fun element of what I was trying to teach. So we were doing some cellular biology things. We did that with Jell-O. Like you were able to make a eukaryotic cell and use Jell-O, and we had candy and had ribosomes with little pieces of candy and such. It was just being creative, and the kids were like, "We can eat this afterwards?" Yes, you can if you want. And so many kids, they're now grown now, of course, but they all would come up to me later on and they'd say, "I remember that experiment where we did a cell using Jell-O and candy," because we had a hands-on application to help make that translation between what's on a 2D picture in your textbook versus what this really looks like in everyday life, and using some connections between what you use in everyday life, such as candy or Jell-O or something else, to make those connections for kids. They loved that. For one of my units, I did a detective unit. So we asked someone from the Buffalo Police Department to come in and show us what they do to do some investigations about crime scenes and such. And so we were able to use that when we were doing some DNA explorations of how is this used in real life. And the more connections you made to real life, the more interesting it was for our kids, So I think that just thinking about the topic and trying to make it as applicable to real life and also making it as fun, was a way to help bridge that divide between dry material and something that's really fun to envision once you dive into it. As you well know, certainly as an administrator, but you probably saw it as a teacher as well. The City of Buffalo School District, its student population, some of the most poverty-stricken, student bodies in the entire state of New York.
Right.
How did you see that manifest itself in the classroom?
Well, when I taught at Bennett, it was before they did the big renovation, and sometimes we had to be creative about how could we make sure that our students had access to the same type of laboratory experiences that maybe students in more resourced schools would have. And so I know I went and I was begging, borrowing, and stealing to try and find things that I could provide to our students. Like many teachers, I would take money out of my check to fund things like making sure that they had the right notebooks. Every kid had to have a composition notebook, so I'd make sure that they would all have them. But I also applied for like a grant through Cornell University. It was for the Cornell Institute for Biology Teachers, and it allowed us to be able to go somewhere. It was like a laboratory garage sale.
Okay, sure.
So you would go there in the summer. They'd give you a week's worth of instruction at Cornell, which was invaluable in teaching us some new technology that we could introduce to our school. And then we could go and look at the used but still good equipment that maybe the laboratory faculty at Cornell
right.
had discarded, so that we could go there and we could get replacements of our glassware, and they gave us old computers that we could use to help allow our students to have that type of technological interface. They gave us so many different laboratory equipment. I would fill up my car to the brim, and I would bring all that stuff back and just infuse it into my classroom so our students had access to those types of materials that maybe some of their peers already had. So as we did the renovation, some of those things weren't necessary anymore. I mean, we got new computers and such, but it was a way to fill in that bridge and just being creative about how can I make sure they get the same experience. And I might need to do a little creativity on my own. I might need to buy a couple things on my own. But I was dedicated to make sure that they got the same experience.
A couple of questions about your teaching experience, if you care to share. Let's maybe talk about the joy of teaching. What was it? What was it for you?
I loved what I taught. I remember
you like the subject matter.
I love the subject matter. I remember being in 7th grade and my biology teacher showing us the DNA helix, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is so cool, and how it could fit together and how you could envision it and just feel just the idea of that. I told my dad immediately, I want to be a biology teacher. I think I started out with saying I wanted to be a biologist. And he said, well, biologists don't make a lot of money. I said, well, then I want to be a biology teacher. And he said, they don't make a lot of money either. I said, all right, well, this is still what I want to do. So, I got into the classroom, and it was so cool because I was like, oh my gosh, this is something I love, and I can share that love with others. And my students were so open to learning that it was a way to share what my passion was. And I really enjoyed what I do. I really enjoyed teaching that, that was where the joy came from.
Sure. We hear so much about teacher burnout. Maybe that's something we can address a little bit later on from an administrative standpoint. But what about for you in your time as a teacher? What was there something that kind of left you struggling, or something you took home and was tough to deal with, or did you love the whole experience? And I see you shaking your head as I'm talking about it. You can't really think of anything.
I can't really think of anything that soured my experience.
Yeah.
I loved doing it.
Yeah. You loved the whole experience.
Yeah. I really did.
Yeah. What do you think? Is that a personality trait, do you think, as much as anything? I mean,
I don't know.
I'm asking you to self-analyze now, administrator.
Yeah, I don't know. I just, as I said, 7th grade, I knew this was something I wanted to do. I knew that I wanted to be involved in science, and I really loved that. And the classroom was a way to kind of apply that love. I liked it. It was something I really enjoyed. I can't think of anything that said to me, "Oh, I hate this." Yeah. No, I really loved it.
Yeah, that's great to hear for sure.
Mm-hmm.
So, Dr. Morris, of course, you did make the transition to administration.
I did.
What was the driving force there?
I wanted to challenge myself a little bit more. I know I loved it, and I wanted to try something new. So I went and enrolled at UB, and I was able to take the admin classes, and I was like, okay. But people kept asking me, like, what do you want to do? Do you want to be like a building administrator? And everyone in the room said they wanted to be a building administrator. And my friends to this day still tease me because when they got to me, I said, no, I want to be a superintendent. And they were like, really? But I did. Okay. I was like, okay, I want to challenge myself. If I'm going to go down this road, I want to challenge myself. And I think that was really the inspiration to go the admin route. I want to challenge myself. I always knew I could teach. I loved teaching, and I could teach biology, I could teach science, and I would be happy. But I really enjoyed, too, challenging myself.
So there was a little time before you became a superintendent, so you spent time in the Buffalo Public Schools Administration.
Sure.
Just tell me about your experience, the roles that you had.
Well, I started out very, very, very briefly in research, evaluation, and accountability, which later on was where I spent most of my career. But I started out initially very briefly there, and then I was moved to a building. And in the building, it was great. It was just a different approach. It wasn't like being in a classroom, and it was more disciplinary. And I was like, I want to capture something that still captures my passion, but it also allows me to feel like I've done something challenging. It's still pushing me to grow. And so that's how I ended up back in research, evaluation, and accountability. It's now the Office of Shared Accountability. There was also another prompt in there as well. All the new assistant principals were laid off, and I was one of them.
Oh.
So I did go back to teaching biology during that layoff period. And once again, as I said, I was happy as a clam. And then I happened to see the person who was running the accountability department, and she said, you could always come back. And I was like, I really enjoyed that. So I went back to accountability, and I spent the majority of my administrative time there.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. What is it about the accountability that attracts you? Or it seems, again, I don't know. I have this feeling that no matter what topic I bring up, you're going to be enthusiastic about it.
There are some topics I'm not enthusiastic about.
Well, we'll keep digging for that.
Yeah. No, this was really a challenge because I was given the responsibility of reporting all of the data for the second largest school district in New York. And at first it was intimidating, but I was like, I could do this. This is going to be really, really fun to tackle. And as I just jumped into it, I really just developed some processes and ways that you could do it in a way that allowed the accuracy of our data to be reflected in reporting. I was very, very methodical in my approach, so that science background really helped. Mm-hmm. And it was just one of those things that I was in a groove. I could do this. This was great. So, 36,000 students and their records, but I knew them. Like, I knew where every single template went and what every single template meant, and when you pulled them from the student information system, how that translated, and how to make sure that every single data set that was ever publicly reported had gone through a vetting process and been validated to make sure that they were accurate. Just that whole thing was just really thrilling.
Right.
I know that's hard to understand sometimes,
but I mean, yes and no. But let's turn that around now. Mm-hmm. So that information that you clearly showed your enthusiasm for collecting it and gathering it. At the same time, there might be people who say too much focus on data, whatever the case may be, or just a person who might say, oh my God, that sounds like as dry as possible. The importance, though, of gathering that information in terms of how that finally translates into the classroom, into the buildings. Talk about that, and I guess if I'm asking you, to make the case for how important that information is.
Oh my gosh, it was so important. I don't think I really truly understood the magnitude of importance until I got into the role. So as in my teaching role, I just knew that the students took their tests at the end of the year and they got certain scores, and sometimes we were on a list and sometimes we weren't. Once I got into the role where I was overseeing all of the data from the entire district, I realized the critical eye that was needed to make sure that every single time a data point was reported about our students, about our schools, about our classrooms, that they had to be the most accurate data set possible, because so many decisions, critical decisions, were made based on that data that was reported. And it was our job in that department to ensure that that was accurate. There was no leeway for accuracy. I'm sorry.
Oh, that's quite all right.
There was no leeway for the accuracy. It had to be accurate. So we had at one point 25 receivership schools. These were categorized as the worst schools in the state. It was important to examine every single data set.
What did you learn?
We learned that, if there were any errors, it was our job to find them, make sure that they were rectified, make sure that they were validated, make sure that everybody knew what the data was saying. So if it was accurate, what is that saying? If it's inaccurate, it's our job to make sure that it's fixed. We would meet with our schools and have these conversations at all of the different stakeholder levels, trying to make sure everybody understood the importance of examining their data. So for me, I was able, as a teacher, to impact a small group of students. Once I got into this role, I was able to help support the entire district. And that was something that was supremely exciting to me.
What was the response, though? Again, you were talking about those 25 receivership schools. What was the response inside those buildings when you were bringing this data was being put in front of administrators and perhaps teachers as well?
Mm-hmm.
What was the response?
At first, I think people were very intimidated. Like, this is something we've been given as a label, and there's nothing we can do about it. And I was like, absolutely not. This is information. And it's our job to make sure that the information is used properly to help drive student outcomes. That's why we're here. And there was a shift between, well, we send all our data to a central point, and then it goes through machinations that we don't know about, and then it comes out on the other side with a designation on the state side. No. I told people, you have a part in this. So we made sure people had levels of access to their data so they too could be involved with its reporting. We told people they had a responsibility to go in there and look at that data and make sure that it was accurate. We told people we're going to have regular reviews of these data so that you know what's being sent up there on your behalf. And there's a responsibility mutually to ensure that these data are reflective of what happened at your building. And so it was more than just this one directional reporting mechanism. This was now a partnership to make sure that whatever state ed got and used to make their determinations, we as a collective have been involved in it. We went from 25 receivership schools to 3. And that's in part because people really gathered around the idea that this was a mutual partnership to make sure that they had the most accurate data to make the decisions on the state ed side, and that was a collective responsibility from everyone.
Stay with us. There's more to come. This is What's Next on WBFO.
Did you know that WNED PBS is always working on great new local shows for you to watch? Documentaries like Kleinhand's Gift to Buffalo, which tells the story of Buffalo's music hall.
The hall is very intimate, and that intimacy makes everyone who comes in here feel a part of our family.
Fun and educational series like Compact Science.
Believe it or not, peppers are technically fruits.
And Shakespeare's greatest hits, featuring some of his best-known soliloquies and monologues.
We are such stuff as dreams are made of.
You can watch them all on our website at wned.org/local shows. While you're there, check out the show pages and mini websites for additional content such as bonus features, photo galleries, and lesson plans. Find it all at wned.org/local shows.
This is the Buffalo-Toronto Public Media History Bite, bringing you a peek into significant historical events for the week of February 12th through February 18th. I'm your host and program director, Tom Barrich. This week's History Bite is a little different, as though I'm only bringing up one fact. The 1908 New York to Paris automobile race. 6 cars representing 4 different nations started the 169-day race, making it, in terms of time, still the longest motorsport ever held on February 12th, 1908. Starting in New York City, the participants crossed the entire U.S. to San Francisco, which mostly did not have any paved roads. From San Francisco, the participants then took a ship to Alaska, which proved to be unpassable, and they were rerouted by ship to Japan. From Japan, then, they drove to Siberia during the very muddy spring thaw, which their progress was measured not in miles per hour, but by feet per hour. Eventually, the roads cleared, and the first car crossed the finish line in Paris on July 30th, 1908. The second car to cross was behind the winner by 26 days, and the race was won by George Schuster of Buffalo, who drove a 1907 Thomas Flyer. You've been listening to the WBFO History Bite. Discover more stories about Western New York's past on the Buffalo History Museum's website. Learn more at buffalohistory.org. For Buffalo Toronto Public Media, I'm Tom Barrich.
Watch great videos produced by your public media stations online. Find Buffalo Toronto Public Media on YouTube and check out interviews by our WNED Classical hosts, original productions from WNED PBS, and so much more.
You're listening to What's Next, our place to discuss the important issues of our communities of Western New York and Southern Ontario. We want to hear from you. Click on the Talk to Us option in the WBFO app, and we will work to get your questions or comments on the air. Do you have a story or concern that we should be addressing? Email us using whatsnext@wbfo.org. Together we'll have the conversations that are needed. This is WBFO, your NPR station.
Dr. Morris, we're with Dr. Genelle Morris here at, she's the superintendent of the Olean City District. And before we get to where you are now, I want to take another step through your career. You go to the Rochester City School District, another school district with its own challenges. And if I'm not mistaken, you were part of a three-person administration. If I'm not, is it the first all-female leadership team there in the city of Rochester? Yes. What took you to Rochester?
Well, it was the opportunity. Once again, a challenge is a challenge. And this was a challenge that was presented where I could be the deputy of teaching and learning and approach systems in the organization and the district from a position that I'd never held before. And in Buffalo, there are no deputies. Wow. So it wasn't like, I could aspire to do that in Buffalo. Right. We just didn't have that.
And you
role.
Knew you wanted to be a superintendent, so this is part of the journey.
I did. And I was like, to be best prepared, this is probably a great step to get there. I see. When I first got there, I was the deputy of teaching and learning. And then the next year I was able to become the deputy of systems innovation and operation. And that took me on the other side of the district. So I was able to do like the academic side and then the non-instructional side. Just an amazing experience to be able to learn to prepare me for this role.
Right. How long were you there in Rochester?
2 years.
2 years in Rochester. Mm-hmm. Yeah. Were the challenges the same in Rochester as in Buffalo, or were they different?
They were different. So we were a brand new administrative team. Comparatively to Buffalo, it was a different size, different scale, but there were just different challenges. We had to gel together as a new team, and then there were so many different challenges that immediately presented themselves. It wasn't something that it was emergent. It was like, here's the keys to the car, and you have to fix all these things right now. So there was that level of challenge. Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So Olean opens up.
Yeah.
And you went right for it.
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah.
Tell me about that process, coming to Olean, and if you could, just take us inside something that most people don't know a lot about. Applying to become a superintendent and becoming one in a as you called it, a city rural district.
We're rural adjacent.
Rural adjacent. Thank you very much. I appreciate that.
We are a small city school district, but once again, before I applied, we came down here, and as I said, I've always gone to Ellicottville. We've spent a lot of time at Holiday Valley, but we came down here, and I was like, oh my gosh, this is awesome. We took pictures by the squirrels that you'll see on North Union.
Right.
It was really cool. So I was like, okay, this is really nice. And we were walking around, and it was just so friendly. It was just such a different feel from anything I'd ever done before. And I was like, I want to explore this further. So I put my hat in the ring and went through the interview process. And the more I looked into the data and looked into the information I could find about the district, I was like, okay, this is really nice. I want to try this. And so thankfully, the board was of the same accord.
Right.
And so came in, presented my idea about a strategic plan and a strategic direction, and they thought that was great. And I was like, wonderful. So we discussed what that direction would look like, and we've been pursuing that for the past 2 years.
What was inside the data that took you to, obviously you built your strategic plan on the data, so what were some of the things you saw that needed to be addressed?
So some of the things that I saw immediately were a concern with special education that was being delivered. A lot of those things, once again, it was a data thing. It wasn't a programmatic issue. It was a data thing. And that was something we were able to immediately rectify. Like, I think it was the second week I was here, and we were able to rectify it and able to change that compliance issue. Yeah, because it was a data thing. It was very, it was one of those things that you just had to make a pivot in your organizational structure, and it was apparent that if we made this change, we could be in compliance, and now we're in good standing.
Okay.
So it was one of those things that had the immediate effect. And then there were issues that were expressed by multiple stakeholders about climate and culture. So coming off of the pandemic, for many school districts, certainly not something unique to here, but climate and culture was a huge area of concern for many schools and school districts. So that was one of the things that our district as well said, you know, we want to tackle as the school year goes along. We want to make sure that our students and staff, they all feel like they belong and that they are welcome and, you know, supported in their school every day. So we've been working on that as well.
The climate and culture, can you give us maybe an anecdote of sorts of somebody who expressed a real specific concern about incidents or whatever? Again, I'm going to let you tell me what climate and culture mean, but what maybe was a thought or some of the thoughts inside that?
So there were some concerns that were raised from the board first, that they had heard from their constituents and from the district that people didn't feel like they belong, not everyone. And so I also heard that echoed from stakeholders like the union or such like that. And so students. So what we did was year one, we had a retreat in Ellicottville, and an author came to present to us at that retreat. We reached out to that author and said, would you be willing to partner with us for the upcoming school year and just really dive into what does belonging mean for our students and our staff and our faculty and our community and our students. And they were thrilled to have the opportunity. So we were very excited to be able to partner with them. It really talked about belonging in all sense of the word. When you walk into this school, you belong here, whether you're a staff member here, whether you're a student here, whether you're a parent or a community member, you belong here. This building is iconic to this region, and it's really one of those things that many people can say to themselves, I remember when I went to Olean, or I remember going there to visit for an occasion or an event. It's really one of those places where once you're a Husky, right? But what does that pride mean? It means that it's pride that extends to all. And so that was something that we, through the belonging work, really took a hard look at. And I think that it was a very good opportunity for people to just kind of challenge some of the things that had prevented some of us from feeling like they belonged. And I think that's been a good initiative that we've been carrying on here.
You're such a data-driven individual, and yet you know what it's all about being in a classroom and working with kids at the same time. So, but you know, so much of this is like what you're talking about here, culture. It's about people, right? Mm-hmm. Is it up to your principals to who? I guess what I'm trying to say is, you know, every stakeholder is going to have their own issues, right? They're going to maybe not feel part of it, or they don't feel that sense of belonging. How is that addressed? I mean, is it something that's done on an individual basis, or do you try to let group initiatives kind of take control and see where it leads us?
Well, our approach was initially we had volunteers from every school, and we have 4 schools, and they all volunteered to be part of this initiative. So we had little teams at each school. They were volunteering though, and they came and they learned about belonging. They learned what are some of the things that we might be challenging within ourselves and as a team to examine those beliefs that are preventing us from ensuring that we all feel like we belong. So they went through that really hard work. At the end of the school year, we extended a climate survey to both our staff and our students to take a pulse on how do people feel. 3 out of 4 people felt at the staff level like they belonged and that they liked being here. So our challenge this year is to target that other 25%. We want everyone to feel like they belong. So we gave our pulse points to our students, and in the spring again, we're going to do another pulse point with our staff. But we've been doing this ongoing work that's been both at the student level, and then we have our stakeholders at our teams level at the schools. They have safe space conversations where they allow teams to come and just kind of have this conversation, like what makes you feel like you belong here, what doesn't, and then they bring that back to the whole team so that they can have conversations about how can we make this more of a place where it's welcoming and belonging. Belonging is a word everyone could understand. And that's something that seemed to resonate with everyone, which is why we were so excited that the author was willing to partner with us on this.
So 3 out of 4 felt they felt that sense of belonging, which of course is encouraging. And you said you're not done; you've got that other quarter to go.
Yeah.
And you're the superintendent. I can clearly see you've set up structures here, and you've got people that are helping to employ these initiatives. At the same time, are you hearing any feedback yet about what some people are saying about not feeling that sense of belonging, or is that a tougher nut to crack to get that information?
It's still a tension. It's not something that went away just because we did this belonging initiative year 1. This will be something that will continue to be ongoing. We will always continue to revisit our data, revisit what we're doing, and continue to adjust. Right. I think, every time we make a couple of wins, we also have to continue to make sure that we are bringing everyone along in this feeling of belonging. And that includes every staff member. That includes all of our students. And sometimes kids feel like they belong, sometimes they don't. Sometimes staff feel like they belong, sometimes they don't. So that's why it's an ongoing challenge, and we're going to continue to rise to that.
I know you inherited Popcorn Wednesday. We're here on Popcorn Wednesday, and
yes.
The building smells absolutely magical here today. But is that the type of thing? I mean, small things like that make a big difference?
Yeah, small things do make a difference. We give out, the Parent Teacher Association gives out popcorn at one of our elementary schools, and I went to help them one day. I haven't gotten as many hugs as I got that day since I've been here. So, I mean, it was really gratifying. That's just one little thing that is an example. But there are so many ways that we try to connect with our students and our staff. We have a very active foundation, and they are very participatory in stuff that we're doing in our schools. They want to fund this. They want to be a part. So that's really exciting as well. So many people want to be a contributor to a positive school district, and they just have such beautiful visions for where we're going, which we tried to capture in our strategic plan that we collaboratively developed last year. So I think that it's just those elements of Husky pride that, they just come out, and our staff, our students, our families, they're just so proud to be from this school community.
What impact are you still seeing, if any, from COVID on students?
So we're still like many school districts, trying to overcome the academic lag that many of our students are experiencing because of the pandemic. We are still working on curricular initiatives that will help address that gap. It's less pronounced at our high school, but still it's there. It's more pronounced at our elementary and our middle schools. So we spent this year doing a needs assessment for our English language arts program, and so it's a collaborative process that we've developed with our elementary and our middle and our high school teachers. They're all coming, they're looking at the materials we're using, and they're going to be part of the overall process to analyze what are we doing and how we can change it to best fit the needs of our students post-pandemic. After that, we will focus on math. So we're systematically addressing the different subject areas that are important for our students to have their literacy, and we're doing that systematically. So this year will be ELA, next year will be math, then we'll focus on science, and we're making sure that each process allows us to look at what we're providing to our students, analyzing that gap, and making sure that we are making sure that they have what they need so that they can start to bridge that gap.
You clearly see the data when it comes to the COVID reality, the impact of COVID.
Yeah.
I'm wondering also, though, because I have a feeling you think about a lot of these different elements. Were there lessons learned with some of the distance learning in COVID? I mean, we most certainly heard about a lot of kids struggle with that, and I most certainly would have been one of them, I guarantee it.
Yeah.
But are there opportunities inside that, maybe moving forward? Again, I'm more on whatever places that could show up in education. I mean, I'm sure if you went to your board tomorrow and said, hey, we're going to be doing more Zoom calls, they probably wouldn't go for it, right?
No, I don't think anyone would go for it.
But at the same time, are there opportunities inside there that we can maybe see coming down the road?
So what it did was it challenged us in terms of how we think about schooling. So it challenged us about remote instruction. What does remote instruction look like? When we talk about our typical snow days and inclement weather days, does it just have to be a day off of instruction? Are there ways that we can make sure that we prepare our instructors and our students to still have elements of learning even though they're at home? That challenge, I think if you had asked somebody 5 years ago, pre-pandemic, I remember being on conversations just with the technology. Can we support this type of direction where we would have one-to-one devices with everybody? Oh my goodness, the pushback that you received. But now it is not uncommon to walk into a district and every student has one-to-one devices and is fully facile with using them, right? They know how to use them. Our teachers know how to make sure that we make that transition and that pivot. And remember, we did that on a dime,
right? Within
a day. We did that, and that's something we learned we could do. We learned how resilient our kids were. We learned that they will go down this path with us for remote learning, and they were able to make that shift. We also learned that there are some forums that worked for our kids in the remote learning environment and that some didn't. We learned that, and that's important to keep that lesson as well, because if we ever have to shift again, we have learned that, certain forums work, some don't. We've also learned that if we need to, not only will we make sure we're delivering instruction, but we've also thought about our socio-economic students that still need support. So when I was in Rochester, we were making sure that, like many school districts, not just here, that we're making sure that they have their meals and that we're providing them with that additional safety net, if you will, that the schools so often provide. So it helps you give that multi-layered prism when you're looking and trying to analyze if we make a shift in a remote learning environment, what do we need to consider? And no one had to think about that 5 years ago.
Right.
So this was it was an important lesson.
All right, Dr. Morris, you intrigued me right from the beginning when you mentioned this term, and now I want to explore it a little more. Rural adjacent district.
Yes.
Olean is a rural adjacent district. It's a city
Correct.
district, small city. Okay, so what do you see? What is the impact of being a rural and adjacent district?
So we have many small city elements that we align to, but our partners in the area are typically rural school districts. And at heart, we are too. We're a small city because of our configuration, but many things we do embrace that rural approach. So that's why we call ourselves rural adjacent. So
I've never heard that term before.
it was something I coined.
Oh, I have a feeling
I
about
should
that.
trademark it, right?
Absolutely, absolutely. So, but how does it impact? I mean, I guess you were in Buffalo, you're in Rochester, now you're here, 3 city school districts, but this one's rural adjacent. So, do you see it? How does it show up in the student body, or in the staff, for that matter?
So it's size, particularly.
Okay.
So we're a small city, but we have 1,700 students. So, it's a smaller size. Many of our counterparts in the area have small sizes like that they have to consider. So we are fully able to relate with that because we're small too, even though we're a small city. We have to worry about traveling long distances when we have to help make sure that we're providing resources and support to some of our students, especially those who have the most neediest needs for support. So if we have a student who has a very specialized need, because we're in a rural adjacent area, it's not very easy to find educators that might be able to provide support that a student might need very specifically. Let's say they need speech and we don't have any speech teachers. It's not like we have a bank of teachers around. We have to do some active recruiting. We have to actively try and bring people to this area. So in that regard, we're kind of, in our own little area, and it's often hard to get resources or educators to come down here. We treasure every single educator we have. And often when we have vacancies, it's very difficult to fill them because we don't have a big pool of educators that are around, or we don't have very specific supports that you would typically see like in Buffalo or in Rochester.
Right.
So we have to be creative.
I was going to say, how are you creative with that?
So unfortunately, sometimes we have to bus students to areas where we can find the support, but then that means long transit times for them. That's not necessarily the ideal, but it's what we have to do to try and get them the support that they need. And that's a huge challenge. I mean, it's just getting them to what they need is very difficult. Sometimes we don't have the technological infrastructure to support whatever it is that we're trying to deliver. So if a student lives in a very rural area in the area and we have to help assist them with education, sometimes the hotspots we'll give them won't work because of where they're located. So there are some challenges, and then we have to see if we can get them to a place where they can get Wi-Fi or get internet access to try and get them connected to what they need. As I said, our teachers are amazing. They will work with our students. It's a community. It really is. It's really that community feel, that community approach. But sometimes we are removed from those immediate supports that you could get if you were in a more urban area.
Is the City of Olean district, is it shrinking, increasing?
We are losing students like many people in the state. We are also experiencing that phenomenon as well.
I know this is a little bit of conjecture, but right now we're in the middle of budget time in Albany, and we most certainly are hearing plenty of stories about the ongoing negotiations, we'll call it that, or posturing when it comes to education aid. I have a sense that you are going to be prepared for no matter what comes your way. But how do you take this news? Again, in a place where, like you said, we're trying to encourage belonging. You're trying to be creative when it comes to how you deal with specific issues when it comes to your students.
Yeah.
What about that? How do you accept that information?
We've been presented with what potential decreases in funding that we may experience. Once again, we value all the team members who come every day to support our students and keep our district operating as it does. However, I tried to immediately look it over and share that reality of that news with the board, with our admin team, with our community. We put this in our newsletter. We try to let people know that, yes, that was the initial proposal that we were given, but this is where your lobbying and advocacy efforts are important and critical, because I'm one of those people, you can tell me no, but you're going to have to tell me no.
I kind of see that.
Right. So I'm like, just because that was your first offer doesn't mean that's your final offer. Is that your best and final offer? In other words, we still have the ability to make our voice heard on the behalf of our kids, on the behalf of our district, and we should do that. We should be lobbying with our legislators. It shouldn't be a surprise in April or May when we're working on the final budget numbers what the state is proposing, and it shouldn't be a surprise that we say we're all going to advocate on this. So I've been sharing all the white papers that I can find on proposals and changes that have been proposed in foundation aid and all the things that we need to consider with our administrative team and with our board, and trying to make sure that people are aware and informed. And that way, when you have a conversation that's supposed to be aligned with advocacy, you're coming from it with an information direction. You want to be able to say, I understand that there's going to be changes in foundation aid. What we're advocating for is don't do it all at once. Right. Don't do it all at the same time, because, gradually we'll be able to absorb some of these changes as long as they're reasonable and methodological, right? But if you just do it all at once, it has a devastating effect on school districts. Everybody needs to be able to say that. So by letting people know what our perspective is and how important this is, then we all are speaking with a unified voice, which is really important, because I've already said we're coming from the part of the state where unless we make our voice heard, nobody hears us. We want to make sure we're heard.
You clearly have shown me that you loved being in the classroom as a teacher, and I don't have any doubt that you love being an administrator just talking to you. What are the qualities that make a good educator? Somebody who's in this, what are there common characteristics?
Yes. A love for your students and a love for what you're doing in terms of teaching them, helping them learn, helping them achieve, being able to find joy in those small and large wins that we see every day. Being able to enjoy having that type of relationship building with families and with your students and with your colleagues. I think all of that is important to be a successful educator. And no matter where you are in the organizational picture, that's a common thing that you would need to have for success.
And I have a feeling you have a big picture idea about this, but for the future of education. The future of education, we will certainly hear it as in a lot of different ways. People have their own criticisms of the education system, but do you see change is always going to be coming, right? That's one thing we know. It's always the same. It's always change. Do you see What do you see on the horizon for education?
Well, I see a lot of infusion of technology, whether that's in an AI environment, if that's more efficient ways of utilizing one-to-one technology. I see more creative ways of being able to demonstrate that you have learned something, being able to acquire that information, sharing that with people, being able to have more hands-on real experiences with things way before you leave the security of the K-12 environment. And I think the more that we move, what the pandemic has done is challenge some of those things that we've said, oh, there's no way we can be flexible with this. You had to be flexible. It was the only way that we could keep this going. And I think that challenge will continue to persist.
Well, Dr. Genelle Morris, thanks for letting us into Olean City School District and sharing with our audience about all the challenges here, but it sounds like a lot of joy to go with it as well.
A lot of joy, always.
Thank you, Dr. Morris.
Thank you.
This is What's Next on WBFO and WBFO HD1 Buffalo, WOLN Olean, WUBJ Jamestown, your NPR station.